Good morning, sir.
We got 2 minutes before we go. So, before we get started, who has heard of the name or has ever seen anything from a person named Floyd Wickman?
Me.
Abe's heard of Floyd Wickman. Anybody else
Yes,
heard of Floyd Wickman?
I knew him very, I knew him very well. I went three of his classes, so I should know his routine.
Okay, fantastic. So, Abe, when was he? When did he start out in the 70s?
When did I start out?
No, when did Floyd? When was he big? Wasn't it Sweat Hogs the 70s or
Yeah,
80s
and
then?
definitely in the 70s and part of 80s.
Fantastic. Because part of what I'm doing goes all the way back to there. And the good news is it's been developed and progressed back from probably the 70s. And even though the business has changed tremendously, some of these fundamentals are still the same as they were because fundamentally people don't change. I see Rob Garver, how you doing? Have your entire career, the commission rate's always been too high, and sellers always thought their house is too much, right? For your whole career, and it probably will persist into the next several generations, if not eternity, if we don't master some of these skills. And today's session is about what I call the control selling method, and it's not about manipulation. It's about having an effective communication skill to get sellers to take the action that's in their best interest. And I put a couple of quotes here. Sales isn't about tricks, pressure, or manipulation. It's about helping people make decisions that are in their best interest, reducing uncertainty, removing friction, and giving them the confidence to take the right step, usually right now. All right. Controlled selling is not about manipulating, pressuring, or controlling the person to get them to say yes. It's not about the tricks, tactics, or scripted responses designed to overcome resistance. It's about earning the right to lead the process without being attached to the outcome. All right. Floyd Wickman was the person that kind of, at least in my headspace, is the person who started this in real estate. Probably copied it from somebody, but that's the control selling method. Before we get started, I want to announce to our Remax Select Florida team we have a new associate broker along with Ciara, Andre Williamson. Andre, you want to wave and say hi to the group here?
Hey, hello
So,
everybody. So happy to be
Andre,
here. I'm so happy to be on this first call. So thank you so
yeah.
much. Bro.
Did you check out any of the stuff I sent you? Because
I
you made
did.
me think. You made me think. And anything interesting for a veteran of your experience that you came up with, or too soon?
Some of the material you sent me. One thing that stood out is about your commission. You're not paying me 3%. You're paying for the services, the process, the company, all of the resources. It's just not the fee is covering a wide range of things.
And sometimes Andre, it's about just repeating things over and over again, so it becomes second nature.
hmm
And when a
hmm
customer is looking at across the table, in many of our markets, 500,000 is not a huge sale price. It's kind of middle of the road. And if you're charging 6%, a homeowner can do this quick math in their heads saying that, hey, it's costing me $30,000. What am I getting for that investment, right? And
Absolutely.
and then they might even think this way, Andre, and say, look, probably took Andre a little bit of time to market and get to the introduction. Might have took him a couple hours to figure out what my house is worth. And do you think sellers or buyers do this math in their head? Well, how many hours does he really need to spend with me to make like 30 grand? Is he going to spend 2 days showing me houses, right? That's 16 hours or less. Is he going to spend, 2 days doing open houses, a day doing pictures, maybe 30 hours for my listing and he's charging me 30,000? That seems a little bit excessive. Do you think sellers might have that thought process embedded in their head, even if it's not intentional? They have to think about like, hey, what's the cost to hire a Andre or a Remax Select agent?
Oh, absolutely.
And one thing I want to remind everybody on this call is when you work for a client, and if it takes you 30 hours to complete a transaction, in 40 hours, 20 hours, right? Your net worth should not be defined by the time that you're dedicating to that transaction, because the real value is all the time that you invested to get the skills to maximize the asset, to maximize the sale price for your client, right? It's like if you go to a doctor and you say, wow, I paid $600 for an hour worth of treatment. Well, you're not really paying 600 for that hour. That doctor went to medical school, took out loans, all these other things that it takes just to become a competent professional in the industry. And I think the consumers forget that process. And I think when we talk about it, it helps build the foundation of us to see ourselves that there's more value than just 20 to 40 hours that we put into a transaction. Does that make sense to everybody? All right.
That's so true.
So, what control selling actually means in practice is the agent sets the tone and the pace, right? And when I talk about this, when you go on appointments, the way that that appointment goes, sometimes you come back to the office and say, "Oh, that was an easy seller," or that particular client was really difficult, right? And we blame the outcome on the client. And I think controlled selling is taking more blame on and more accountability on ourselves for the process. In other words, we may have a process that works for us 70% of the time, and somebody else might have a process that works 98% of the time. And it's truly process and mindset driven, not client driven. Because before I got into the industry, before I put myself, into the front line, went out on listing appointments, did buyer consultations with clients, I felt that there was a randomness, at least a more significant randomness to this business as to what the outcome was from a meeting. Does that make any sense? Right? And now that I look back on it, I say it's about the way that we control the process. It's not by the words we say. It's not by the pace that we do. It's about everything that goes along with it. It's about having the knowledge. It's about having the communication skills. It's about knowing that the person asking the question is the person in charge, right? Because we feel like we want to go out there and being servants that we are, we want to say, hey, do you have any questions? What can I answer to help you, right? And you're inviting them to ask questions, and basically you're giving control over to them. You're saying, hey, take control of this process. The agent frames the choices, okay? The best salespeople I know, the best agents I know are doing this, but they don't know they're doing it. So can anybody think of a way that you frame a choice? Because you've probably done it a lot of times in all your processes.
Your three options to the seller technique, I think, is an excellent one that you use.
Right. So you would show the hey, here's how three sellers have fared in your neighborhood, and Pam, if we decided to work together, which of these three strategies do you feel would be right for your client, right?
Right.
And as I go through this journey trying to serve and help everybody, I come up with little tips that at some point I want to be able to consolidate all of these into maybe one or two sessions so that everybody can go back and say, hey, this is really the key techniques that make clients feel good about the process, right? And Pam, before you even do that, another magical way that I found is of doing the MMFI. Now, who remembers what MMFI is?
Make
Pam?
me feel important.
Right. Do you think you think when your client feels special and important that it makes it easier for you to close a transaction? Do you think it makes it easier for them to make the right choice? Do you think it
Absolutely.
reduces friction, right? So when I put here the controlled selling method, I'm going to look back to this. It says controlled selling. So controlled selling, it's not about tricks, tactics, or scripted responses designed to overcome resistance. It's about earning the right to lead the process without being attached to the outcome. It's about reducing uncertainty, removing friction, and giving them the confidence to take the right next step now, right? And that's not really about manipulation. That's about controlling the process. And controlling the process and manipulation are different. Okay, you would think if you're controlling the process, it could be a manipulation, but it doesn't have to be. Okay, so you frame the choice. Has anyone taken the time to share with you the three distinct options the three distinct strategies you have, Pam, before you launch your home onto the market? And when you ask that question, has anybody asked that question to a homeowner?
I'm still
And if you
practicing the
haven't,
technique.
so if you haven't, I would write that one down, because that really makes them feel like you're giving them special treatment. Has anyone taken the time to share with you the three distinct strategies you have when you launch your home onto the market? Because I've never been on an appointment where somebody says, "Oh yeah, Joe from brand X told me this, and this," right? And you can just see in your head that nobody's going to know what they are. If they say, "Oh yeah, somebody has," what three strategies did they share with you, Pam? Oh, I don't remember. Okay, that's very. So at the end, I think you'll be able to remember mine, because I'll make them very simple and memorable, and I'll give you the ability to control the process. The agent leads the client to clarity. Okay. And the opposite of leading the client to clarity is the agents that are in this industry that really give us a bad reputation, that will go out there and say, "Hey, Jason Panos, I'll take your house for 600, even though it's worth 500. They'll buy the listing. And, I've heard these people come back, and this actually makes me sick when they say this. They say, "Hey, Jason, you can't get a price reduction on a listing that you don't have." Right. And to me, that lacks integrity in the process. Right. Yes, you might get to a payday, but it doesn't have integrity. And it also, violates my principle of, if Jason, if you and I decide to work together, my goal is not just to get the 30,000 or my half of the $30,000, right? My goal is to get Jason to be a vocal advocate, to refer me to people. And I'm going to use the Alan Kazin way. It might actually be part of our training here, which is you go out of your way to refer people because you care about the people, and you want to make sure the people get the service that a Jason Panos delivers, as opposed to just throwing a dart at the board, right? Because we all know, I think in 5 years, 80 or 90% of agents are out of the business. And, Andre, you probably know that of the 10 to 20% that are still in the business, they're not running businesses that the people on this call want to have, are they?
No,
right? What do you think the average agent in Florida earns, Jason, if you took the total income divided by the number of agents? Probably not much, right?
Well, I know that nationwide, the average agent, I think like 80% of them earn under 41,000. I think that's what it's been for the last several years. So I would imagine Florida, it's probably right around that.
Yep. So, there's a big difference between, being in the business, right, and thriving. And, the agents that are at the top half of 1%, are they doing better than they were 10 years ago today? Are they doing better than they were 5 years ago today? I would argue that if you looked at the cream of the crop, even after the crazy highs of the COVID days, that top half of 1% have probably figured out ways to continue to grow their business, right? Many of them have built teams. Many of them have leveraged their business through technology. Many of them have leveraged their business through outsourcing. And now, outsourcing can even be through almost like virtual employees. Like, Glenn Baker does a lot of training for us. And instead of thinking about your AI resource as being task oriented, think about it being an employee. It's kind of like the next thought process. The agent uses scripts to guide decisions. Okay. And when I say scripts, I want to use that in the terms of not like it's a canned, unauthentic, not thought out, not your own words that you're using. But when you get the objection or you get the question, that you don't reinvent the solution every time, right? And I'll call that a script. Okay. A script is you don't have to think about how you're going to answer it, right? And Jason, how many years have you been in the business?
10.
10. So from year one to now, your ability to come up with an answer to a objection or a question, it's probably, I'm guessing, more consistent because you have the answer at the top of your tongue, right? And you don't have to think about
But
it.
I've also had 10 years to practice them. I've, heard them, and, I always learn, and I'm always willing to learn. So I always listen to podcasts that new objections I haven't heard yet. So yes. I'd like to think that that I continuously hear new ones and come up with ways of answering those questions.
And you probably will continue to hear new objections that even after educating yourself and listening to podcasts might kind of catch you off guard. But here's like another excellent way to recover from a question that you don't really have the comfortable answer for. And this is worth writing down. I would say, Jason, that's interesting. Why would you say that? Right? And it kind of deflects it and puts the burden on them to define why they're asking that question. It's not snarky, it's not manipulative or tricky. It's just, hey, that's interesting. Why would you say that? My neighbor told me I should put it on for at least 550, and any agent that tells me it's less than 550, I should tell them there's the door. Oh, that's interesting. Why would you say that, Jason? And then kind of explore what their foundation for their belief system is. So the agent controls the narrative, not the client or the market, right? We don't really control the client and we don't control the market, but we do control the narrative. We do control the conversation. We control the process. The agent becomes the adult in the room, not a passive tour guide, right? I don't mean that to be, hey, I have a license. I'm better than you, Jason. It's just that, I've been here before. I'm going to explain to you. I'm going to share with you some experiences. I'm going to ask you some questions on why you believe what you're talking about. Less friction means more connection. So who starts a client appointment with a question, and what question do you start an appointment with? So, Jason, go ahead.
Then why are they thinking about moving? What is their process of moving?
Okay. Why are they thinking about moving? And that probably gives you some pretty good insight into A, building rapport, and B, trying to get them future pace to where they're going. Jason, what do you ask?
A buyer or seller, because they're slightly different.
How about a buyer?
So buyer standard is what's your ultimate goal? If we were to find the perfect house tomorrow, what's your timeline? What's your ultimate goal? Because that'll open the door to a bunch of other questions, but I tend to ask that if I don't know another question to ask. That's usually what I lead into both sides.
Yeah. And the fact that you kind of know the questions that you're going to ask is probably even more powerful than having to think about what you're going to ask, even if it was a better question, because you know what you're going to say. What do you think some friction points are in transactions that we struggle with?
Say that again. I'm sorry.
What are some of the friction points in a relationship or a transaction that we struggle with? So on a buyer or a seller or renting, what are the friction points that cause issues? Commission.
Anytime you talk about money.
And I'll bet you that are there some agents that don't have issues with commission. I'm just curious about that.
I have less and less problems with it, but I can say that to answer your question, that is a friction point, I think, with buyers and sellers. That's always one that they want to save money. And so that can be a question that they want to ask in a way that I think does create a friction. And I think that that's one of the most important things that we should be able to answer. And sometimes agents are too afraid to talk about money.
And Jason, just curious, do you know like how when you go on a listing appointment, maybe for the past quarter, the past year, do you know how your sales, specifically sale to list price, compares to the rest of the competition in whatever the market you define is?
It's a little, I think our market's like 97.4. I think I'm sitting at just above 98. Some of them sell in like 2 weeks. Some of them take 4 months, but the list to sale ratio price is just above 98, I think, right now.
Okay. And would it be helpful to you if you were able to boost your list to sale price in defining your value? Or is that not something that you feel comfortable or compelled to discuss?
Well, sure. I think for the reason why when I go into a listing appointment, because I ask the questions I do, the very first thing I ask as a listing, which we've talked about many times on here, is, why am I here? If I sell your house in 2 weeks, what's your timeline? What's your goal? Is your goal to get the highest, sale price possible, the least amount of time, or a combination of both? If their goal is, I want to get, the top sale price and time is my friend, I'm okay with extending this out a little longer where my days on market might go up, but my list to sale price is going to stay above 99 almost guaranteed versus, hey, we're military, we've got to move in 2 months. We've got to be aggressive on the price. So do I market it much lower knowing that time is, the biggest factor where I know I'm going to get multiple offers? It drives that sale price percentage up. So I think it depends on the goal. And sometimes I talk about that where I don't care about where we start and where we finish. I care about if we've met your goals. And that usually will sell a lot of the listing appointment.
One of the things I find is what we focus on or what we measure, even if it's subconsciously, it starts to improve, right? So if you have more awareness on how your list to sell price is compared to your competitors, and it could be the overall market, Jason, or it could be the top 3 people that compete with you regularly.
Sure.
If you're focusing on that and you're, a 0.5% better now, and you constantly measure it, you focus it, you think about it, do you think it's going to improve and that margin is going to increase, or do you think it's going to stay the same?
I mean, obviously improving in your own personal stats, knowing your own personal stats and what they mean. Like if I was in the 95%, it's like I'm always listing high, knowing I can come low. Yeah, I think that, I lose some of the credibility, but I think knowing it is important because it might come up, but I don't know that in some cases, my goal more than ever is to build the relationship and make you trust me in a way that I'm going to listen to your needs. But what is our goal? If our goal is to do price reductions every 30 days, we have a different mindset of where we're trying to be versus I'm okay with waiting 60 days because I know our average days on market 72, but I can get you about 98% of where we start. They're okay with that. They know that I'm at least mindful of it. So, I mean, my goal is I know it, but I don't make that the forefront. But I do think that obviously improving that number makes me more effective.
Yep. And this is a kind of an open-ended question to the group. Have there been things that have changed in the industry that when they happen, you're like, oh, this is horrible, not good for anybody. And then 6 months or a year down the road, you're like, well, that's the best thing ever. Can anybody think of anything like that and share that? Because
Brokerage
I had a
agreements.
conversation.
Yeah, buyer broker agreements. Yeah.
Buyer broker agreement.
COVID was like that.
The buyer broker. I met with Trudy and David Hayes, some really talented agents, and we were talking, and they do some Zillow. They're very good at converting Zillow leads, and they said that the buyer agency agreement was really a lot of friction in the beginning, but now it really does eliminate people that want you to open the door and show them because their agent's on vacation and they just want to find somebody to open the door, and then they're not intending to work with you at all. And those people refuse to sign the buyer's agency agreement because they have no intent to work with you. And both David and Trudy said, Rob, that's the best thing that's happened, in the past decade is, telling them that they have to do this. And I can ferret out people that are going to waste my time. There's a perfect example of a change that we all thought was, oh, geez, this is going to be horrible, to now probably the majority of the industry appreciates the fact that we're required to do that, as opposed to, being an outlier and asking for that. And Andre, you were with a different brand before us. Did you get a lot of friction and resistance and perhaps even some non-compliance with it today in this market with people who are deniers, right?
Yeah, we definitely had some of that.
And do you think the better performers really embraced it at the once they got over the hurdle and the transition of it, right?
100%, yes.
So that's why I think friction can be our friend, and friction can be a way of just changing the process. Andre, did you ever have an agent come to you and say, man, I thought that appointment went great. I can't figure out why I see that listing going up today when I thought I was going to get an appointment next Thursday, right? They think that the meeting went well, and then they're like, well, how the hell did I lose that?
Right, for sure.
And what do you like? Being in leadership, what do you think the reason is behind that? I'm just curious, like somebody who, you probably heard people complain, I can't believe it must have been their niece, or sometimes they come and say, Andre, I'll bet you that agent took it for 1%.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they took it from me. But what do you think?
It's usually two things. It's usually about the commission or I'm sorry, the price. And I always say it could be about the personality clash as well. Although you may think you're communicating to that person correctly, but you probably need to study up on your this personality profiling so that you can make sure that you are effectively communicating to that seller or buyer.
Yep, because I have a saying here, Andre, for the group is like, if you're in the same market, and we're basically all in the same market, you can't
Hmm.
attract just the negative, the low price, the discount people. You can't attract those solely. And a lot of it has to do with the way that we engage them and the way that we make them feel good about paying a fair price and putting it on the market at a reasonable price. That's going to give them the better outcome.
Absolutely.
And
And that's fine.
good. Yeah, I remember. So here's another some write down worthy quote. Andre, how important is it to you to have control in the process?
Agents should definitely have full control of that
So,
process.
so when you ask a client, how important is it for you when
Okay.
we work together, for you as a seller to have control of the process? How many sellers do you think want to have control of the
Oh,
process?
they all want to have control.
And I'm gonna go to Arizona. Brian Neugebauer, how do you have control of the process?
Say that again, Rob.
So if I'm talking to a prospective seller, right, and I say to you as a seller, Brian, how important is it for you to have control of the process? I would think most sellers would say that they want to have some control, some level of control over the process, right?
100%. Yeah.
And then that's a setup for that's a setup for a follow up. And do you know what the follow up is? And what if you miss it, Brian, you're going to be like, I knew that, but I'm surprised I didn't say it.
I don't have that answer, Rob. Sorry.
So Brian, as a seller, the way that you can have control of the process is if we can build competition and get at least two people interested in buying your house. So what we want to talk about is different ways that we can position the property so that we have more competition that give you control over the process. Because Brian, if we are only able to attract one buyer and they decide they want to stop, 15,000 below an acceptable price to you, how much control over that process do you have, Brian?
Well, the answer is going to be very little to none.
You have none. But if we have three people bidding against each other, do you feel like you have more control over that negotiation process?
As the seller, absolutely.
And if we decided to work together, are you sure the best strategy, do you think the best strategy would be to try 50,000 more and see if we get lucky, or you think we might want to revisit that, Brian, and take a look at how the numbers play out,
Yeah, getting more offers is definitely the better way to go.
right? And I'm having a lot of fun with Andre because I'm sure Andre had a lot of these problems down the road as a manager and a regional manager. Did you ever have an agent that took a listing, they nailed it, right? They did an excellent job. The first weekend, you got five offers, and then the seller is not satisfied, and they might say, "What?
You may underprice the property.
We underpriced the property, right?" Brian, I told you
Mhm.
we should have won 50,000 more, right? And Andre in his role, I'll bet you that it was probably at least monthly that you saw somebody that turned down a really good offer, and then 3 months later they're doing their third price reduction, trying to get that momentum back on that property, right?
Happens all the time.
And this goes to the point, Brian, where you can get somebody who just lists the property. Hey, I want 550. You tell them, hey, I've been doing this 22 years. 500 is going to get us the right activity. Boom, you get that offer. But if they feel that they might have left money on the table, do you think that they're going to have a positive um, uh, reference from the transaction, or you think they might have this subtle gut feeling that they might have gotten more if they would have listed it for higher? The answer is they probably think they could have listed it for higher and got more. But if you you empower them to make the decision and it's truly their decision, when you say, hey, Brian, congratulations, we have five offers. Remember we talked about controlling the process? Dude, you did it, man. You did it, Brian. And then they feel good about it instead of saying, you know what, I think I should have went for more. I left money on the table. These are not minor distinctions, Brian. These are like, and this is the Grand Canyon in real estate, all right? It's not something that you step over. It's massive.
Yeah.
Let's see. Uh, we can go back to like the buyer who you have a great conversation with and they ghost you, right? Same type of thing. You go on a listing appointment, you thought you nailed it, they list it with somebody else, and the real painful part, Andre, is a lot of the times that you see it on the hot sheet, right? They didn't even call you and tell you that, right? Like, I can't believe it. I was supposed to go out there next Friday, and I see it's now the property's got an open house this Sunday.
Hmm.
How rude is that? Well, you know, it's your fault. It's our fault. But the good news is that we don't have to be bitter about it. We can fix it. All right. Sales isn't about having the perfect script. Sales is about having a process. All right. Sales isn't about having the perfect script. It's about having a process. And throughout my career, I know a lot of people who don't really like the title sales in their. I'm a realtor salesperson, right? A lot of people want to say I'm an advisor, I'm a consultant, right? And I think we should embrace sales, all right? And it's not a bad thing. And if we think it's a bad thing, then the clients think it's a bad thing. But I'm happy being in sales because I'm going to sell your house. So I'm a salesperson. And sales isn't about, trying to look back with a photogenic memory and thinking about what's the response to that objection. It's about, just knowing how to answer the questions that are constantly coming up, where it's a conversational way, not a scripted, awkward response process.
And Rob, if I can
Um,
just comment on that really quick, on the sales portion of it,
yeah,
that goes for being the buyer's agent as well, because when we're out there and we're showing properties, honestly, we can fight ourselves right out of a deal. We can fight our clients battle so far that they just don't want the property anymore. So, when you're out there showing properties, make sure that you are pointing out the wonderful things about the house and actually do put that sales hat on and sell it.
right. So, Sarah, I'm going to unpack two things with that. One is a mistake that I see the industry making is we sell houses instead of kind of selling home ownership first, right? And if you don't sell home ownership and talk about what that means, then you're just doing what everybody else is doing. And if somebody will do it for less and be more available, then you're probably replaceable. Would you agree with that? And
Absolutely.
I'm just looking on here to see, is there anyone that I did that I helped you or assisted in your buyer seminar or your buyer event that you've done? Anybody online where I've helped you with that? All right, I have to do more of those. Make a note. But one of the things that I like to do at the end of a buyer education event, right, is I'll go around and I'll ask the attendees, can you tell me what's something that you learned, right? And we'll go around the room. And many times, if there's less than 10 people, we can go around the room twice where people will give me things that they've learned, such as, hey, the cost of waiting, right? They'll say, I didn't realize the tax benefit. I didn't realize that there was compound depreciation, right? So all these things, and Dan, I've done sales ones with you, right? Dan Gagnon,
Yes, you showed up into Boynton Beach.
right? And at the end, did we do that?
Yeah.
Where we asked, what did you learn, right? And it's really powerful to see what the people learn because it's not what you taught, it's what they say that they took away.
Right.
And it makes them feel important, it makes them feel significant, it has them participate. And they're like a little child. They want to say, "Oh, I learned this, right? Oh, you took my answer, Dan. Now I have to go to my second best answer." And that's why I talk about selling the concept of home ownership, right? And it's not about manipulating. It's about if you really buy into, I want to become a homeowner, then you might not lose that house for $5 or $10 or $25,000. And I'm going to go back to Andre. Andre, you're my co-host today. Andre, did you ever have a agent that had the client that goes back to them and says, "Damn, man, if I would have known that could have had that house for 530 instead of 515, I would have paid 550 for it," right?
Mm-hmm.
When they see what it actually sold for, and they're like, "Oh, I would have done that," but that at the time they weren't going to budge, right?
Correct.
And the agent comes back and says, "See, these buyers, they're so crazy, right?" But I look back at it and I say, it's more on us, right? Because I know that they like to throw that out that, hey, I would have paid 20 grand more, but you were like, you wouldn't go up a nickel, right? You had this arbitrary number. And I think the reason behind that is we didn't play the appointment properly. We didn't get them to understand like what's the cost of waiting, how would you feel if you lost the house for this? All of those questions that we could have been asking. So people don't hire us for our time; they hire us for our proven process, right? When you have a solid process, your confidence instead of becoming a 7 or a 9 becomes an 11, and it's not an arrogance, but it's a confidence, and it's a confidence that people can feel, right? And early on in my career, going out on appointments with your peers, I kind of fell into a trap where I did all this work and I had this beautiful, listing appointment booklet that they used to do. And Andre, you might even know the days where you took it and you put it on this machine and you bound it, right? And it was a beautiful book, right? And you go out there, the appointment's going so well. And then you say, all right, well, let me talk about the book, right? And then the appointment goes sideways because you
That's true.
basically start talking yourself out of a closed sale. So you need to have that awareness, right? And with confidence, you don't need to open up all the work that you did if you've already communicated and you won the game, right? Because then you're gonna invite more questions.
Rob, I also think supply and demand plays a big role in it as well, convincing people. I went to a listing appointment yesterday afternoon in a building in Lauderdale by the Sea. It had 136 condos in there, not a single one for sale. And the sellers, whom I met at an open house on another property in Boca, decided to list with us. They signed the agreement and it went coming soon this morning. They also signed a BBA to look at homes tomorrow. So they're going to get top dollar for their condo just because there's nothing for sale in there and they're in high demand, right on the beach, right on the ocean.
Right. And hearing you talk about that, Dan, you sound like a very confident man, and that's why you got that piece of business. And everybody else is going around, oh, condos in Florida, there are all these issues with them, right? But
Mm,
you're like, hey, there's nothing, you have no competition. So I'm sure you had a very interesting conversation about what strategy that they can deploy, right?
yeah.
And here's something, and Andre, this is your first exposure to this, but do we still have Abe on the call? Oh yeah, Abe, I see you. Then we have the 10-10-0 rule, okay? And I borrowed this from somebody, I can't remember who it was, but they would say that at our brokerage we have the 10-10-0 rule. And Andre, what that means is if in 10 days we have no showings and the market's sending us a message that your house is overpriced, and it's a signal for us to reposition it before we accumulate days on the market. And if we have 10 showings with no acceptable offers, it's telling us a separate message, right? And I love that immediately. I love that narrative, right? But I took that and I put my own spin on it. I said, Andre, in order to preserve the equity in your home and maximize the value, we utilize the 10-10-0 rule. Has anyone shared with you what that is? Right. And nobody, no, even if somebody told them, there's some oddball chance they don't remember it. Right. And I wouldn't have it put on a page in my listing presentation. I would have them write this down. I like, Andre, some things in this business are so important that you need to write them down. The first 10 is if we have 10 days with no showings, the market's sending us a message. And the message is that we need to reposition before we accumulate days on market and hand over control to buyers. The second 10 is if we have 10 showings and no reasonable offers, that means that our property is inviting but not compelling, and we need to make a lesser adjustment in the price to make it competitive. Now, what I did to that 10-10-0 rule is I made it more about you, and I said, Andre, we have a rule to protect the equity in your home that we utilize, and I have you write it down. Okay, it sounds insignificant, but it's a world of difference between that and giving them a piece of paper. Because when you have them write it down and you call them on day 10, half of the clients, if not more, are like, hey, yep, I know it's day 11. We need to make an adjustment. My wife and I have been thinking about that, Andre. We're thinking that we should come down by 50,000. What do you think? Right? Does
Hmm.
that not make the conversation a lot easier?
Oh, absolutely.
And why would we not? Why would we not say that at the onset?
Every
Right?
interview we've had, it works every time. I'm with you, and I can say I see 10 out of 10, and it's pretty good average.
Yeah. We call that, Abe and I call that a wet solution. A W for works, E for every, T for time. It's a works every time solution. Sales is not something you do to people. Sales is something you do with people. You're helping somebody move from where they are today to where they want to be tomorrow. And that doesn't mean move their house. It means, whether they're buying a house and changing their situation. And in real estate, we're not selling houses, okay? We're selling the process. We're helping people make decisions involving money, timing, family, uncertainty, fear, excitement, and change. There can be a lot of emotion that comes into that, and we need to be the one that controls. Like if somebody's a high emotion, we need to bring them down. If somebody has no emotion, we need to get them emotionally connected to the process. Don't try to be somebody you're not. We're not trying to turn you into a slick salesperson. That's probably the anti Rob. We're just trying to give you a structure that allows you to become more effective. That's the control process. And many of us know if we have a client that takes our advice and doesn't give us a lot of friction, usually the transaction goes smooth, right? And if there's somebody who's, we have discomfort ourselves in that we're not pricing the property right, we're not being ourselves, the process usually becomes more complicated and the outcome doesn't become as preferable. The 9 C's, good.
Rob, one of the things that I did, and actually my customers did it once at a listing appointment, was once I finished going over the comparable prices for them, or the CMA, they each took out a piece of paper and they wrote down where they thought the house should be priced. And it was really kind of unique because by doing that, and I've used it in other listing appointments, I found out if we were all on the same page or which one of them was not on the same page, and they kind of made it like they folded the paper in half and then we uncovered their estimates. So it was really quite interesting and a good way of getting to the heart of who might be holding out. Sometimes it's one or the other and not both, to get going with the property. So then it's easy to
Yeah.
say, okay, we all agree. So now we can let's sign the papers today and move forward. So anyway, just thought I'd share that.
Yeah, thank you. That kind of goes towards building that connection, right? And when I started going on appointments, listing appointments, they definitely weren't what I thought they were. Being that I didn't start out in the real estate business, right? I just kind of said, let me try to figure this out and look at it through a different lens, a different prism. I've always looked at the first part of the appointment and walking through the house as more about building rapport during that process of walking through the house. When you walk past the 2 bedrooms that their kids grew up in, they tell you, "Oh, my daughter's in veterinarian school. My son's now he's now a practicing attorney in the city." Like, you get to learn the story by walking through the house. Is that true or true, right? Mm-hmm. You're not just measuring the rooms and thinking about, when we change the paint color of this room. You're building rapport, and you're building that connection where you get to know the people a little bit better, so that you can have a much more structured conversation at the kitchen table, the dining room table, wherever you go. So the 9 C's, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it: comfort, care, connection. These are the foundational ones, right? And, I think the most important one is connection. I think comfort comes from experience. Comfort comes from, Dan knowing that there's none on the market, Dan being able to explain to them that they happen to be in a really strong position because there's no competition. Caring, people can sense the fact that you care, whether you care about them, the process, or just yourself. They know that. And connection is where it really comes together, right? That's where you build rapport and bond. Control, clarity, crystallize. Okay. Control is having your appointments be very similar in the way they go every time and not random. It's not really based upon what the client says. And I like it when somebody gives me, some irrational information. And what I like to do is I'd say, hey, Brian, if you found the best agent in the entire state of Arizona to put that house on the market and you put it on at $150,000 more than it's worth, I'm just curious, how long would you wait before you adjusted the price? Now, notice what I did. I didn't say if we did it, right? I said if you found the best agent with the best marketing, the best track record, they put it on the market at that price is 750 and it doesn't sell. And, my data suggests that the perceived market value is 600, but you put it on at that 750 with the best agent. Just curious, how long would you wait before you adjust the price? And I think that's a very fair question because we're investing our time, we're investing our money into this, right? We ought to know, we ought to know what their next move is, right? And I didn't presume, I didn't want to have it be a debate about them telling me, oh, well, what kind of marketing did you do, right? I'm not making it about me, I'm making it about the process. So that's a really powerful way to reframe the conversation with the seller.
Yeah. Rob.
Yep.
Rob, I just want to put this out there. You'd be surprised, and many of you do, and how many sellers are not aware of the three options a buyer has when they take out a mortgage and the appraisal comes in too low. That helps in setting the list price as well because they have to understand expectations.
Yep. And I don't want to ask this at this point because we're running out of time, but Dan, if you think about it, like, hey, part of the value that I have is we're going to have a home inspection, and many times there's a home inspection. Your house is 29 years old. They might want it to be in new condition. We're going to talk about how we're going to respond to that. Okay, and I'm going to share with you my experience, right? So that's an excellent point that you bring out. So we can, we build, we control the process, we provide clarity. We try to crystallize things by saying, all right, so now that we decided that putting it on at 750 is not the right price, out of these three strategies, which strategy do you want to use to maximize control over the process, right? And if you think about it, and this is not part of the conversation, but you might go to an absolutely ridiculous seller and say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, if we put your house on for 100,000, what do you think would happen? Right? And let's just say it's a house that's worth $1 million, Dan. Say if we put it on for 100,000, what do you think would happen? Oh my God, we'd have a line out to like we'd probably have to get traffic control, right? And I'd say to you, Dan, what would happen if we put your $1 million to $1.3 million house on the market for 10 million? Oh, that's ridiculous. We get nobody would even look at it. All right.
People
So
would
I'm
think it
kind
was
of
a typo.
crystallizing. Well, I'm crystallizing, the extremes, right? To try to get the client to understand that process. And then resolution, consult, close, and confirm. Okay. I'm just going to try to cherry pick from and these are all in that link, the notes that come out with the email that you get, the video email. Okay. Before I can make somebody else comfortable, I first have to be comfortable. Very obvious. Think about what happens when you're nervous. You talk too much, you rush, you over explain. Your over explaining is not a positive thing, right? We need to ask questions, ask better questions. We need to embrace the awkward pause, right? Before you, let's see, some of this stuff's really basic. All right, so what? One of the things for our industry that makes people uncomfortable, and oftentimes people that are very competent become uncomfortable. Now, did you ever have an appointment and you're busy? It takes you 20 minutes to get there. You allow yourself 22 minutes, and then there's a car accident, there's traffic, there's something happening, and you're running late. Now, when you're running late, do you think that you're at your best state of mind in that circumstance, or do you think that you're starting out at a disadvantage? Anybody?
You're starting out at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
Right? And if you show up 1 minute late, 5 minutes late, if you're close to your competitor, right? Do you think they might say, you know what? We kind of like Brian and Robert the same, but you know what? Brian was like 10 minutes late, so I think we're going to go with Robert. Like that might be a game changer. Just the fact that you weren't early and on time, and beyond that, you might not be your best version when you're late because you start with apologizing. Oh my God, there was an accident on the turnpike. It was completely stopped for 10. Right? So you're already making excuses before you even interview for the job, right? It's not a good way to start. one thing that I heard in one of the podcasts, and I actually shared this with you, Andre, when you listened to it, is one of the guests on the podcast says, "Hey, when I go through a house, like I'll go through and I'll say, hey, you know, Andre, you redid the kitchen 3 years ago. Was that your idea or your wife's? Hey, when he said, oh, it was my wife's. Hey, Becky, when you decided to redo the kitchen, did you do it with resale value in mind or just to make the house eminently more livable while you're here? Right. And then I'll go to Andre and say, Andre, your wife made a great choice. So now I just made you both feel really positive, right?
Hmm.
And it was not phony baloney, right? And it was embracing, something that's really simple. It's that low hanging fruit to build rapport. Yeah, you know, if there was no competition, we would be spending this extra hour on Fridays probably doing something else. But you know what? Competition makes us better, right? And the fact that we're thinking about how we can differentiate ourselves actually makes us better and makes us more referable in the future for more business. This is I don't want anybody to answer, but like I'm always intellectually curious about how I can do things better, and I think that's a positive, right? And if there was no competition, I probably would be less curious, and I probably would not be trying to figure out ways to provide clients with next level service. So competition is a great gift. It truly is. And if the business was easier, we would be like travel agents. We'd be out of business, okay, and we wouldn't get paid well. Think about it. If the business was easy, we would have been automated out of a job, or we would get paid very low. Does anybody actively role play? Because you know what, in this business, the objections are, Cindy Reddy. How long have you been in the business? You're somebody I've come to look up to a lot more over the past 6 months.
A lot of years, like 28
Uh,
plus years, full time.
right, and your mom was in the business before you, right?
Right.
So I'll bet you that your mom's first day in the business, most of the objections are the same as they are now.
Very similar.
All right. There's just, maybe it's a little bit more, there's a little more technology involved in it, but the core objections are still the same.
Right.
And, that's the amazing part about this business. And I would look at the attachment I put on there because there's a lot of stuff that kind of connects the dots here, but I don't think they're as important. Stop presenting and start prescribing. So that was a pretty interesting way of thinking about it, right? Because if you're presenting, you're really not engaging. When you're asking questions and you're prescribing solutions, that's really where the value comes.
Rob,
Yes.
this is Janet in St. Louis. I wanted to piggyback off something that Daniel said about the appraisal. And it just made me think about how we have to sell the house really 3 times. And I explained that to sellers, that you're selling it to the agents because they know if the house is overpriced. We're selling it to the buyers because they're so savvy and knowledgeable now. They know or will think a house is overpriced, and then we're selling it to the appraiser. So really that price is under scrutiny 3 different times. So explaining that or sharing that with the seller is a big deal. When you were talking about scripts, I remember a manager of mine, and this was 40 years ago when I started. Back then we had scripts, and her big deal was telling us to say something to ourselves at least 40 times so that we could internalize it. And she said, say it while you're driving, say it while you're doing this or doing laundry. But if you internalized it 40 different times, then when you said it to someone, it felt more comfortable. And that the trick to it all, she said, even though it's a script, she said, you need to make it sound spontaneous. And I'll never forget her, Pat Hutton. She was like, whatever that script is that you're pulling from air, and she called that the PFA method, plug from air, but you're pulling it from air. She goes, you need to make it sound spontaneous. And that's the key to successes with scripts. So I still use it 40 years later, and I share that with my agents.
Jen, as we run out of time here, I'm going to say, when you have a listing appointment or a buyer appointment and it's competitive as hell and you've done really well, You've answered the questions. You've identified the key value distinctions between you and the competition, and you get the listing when it was a not a layup seller versus a seller that doesn't ask any questions. You sign the paperwork, you get it done. Which one do you feel better when you exit? It's almost always the competitive one where you had
Right,
the
the
answers and
competitive
you're
one
able
that you
to.
won. It's a little victory, and then you do the happy dance, and then you have wine, and then yeah.
Correct, because all your skills were kind of tested, right? And you passed the test. It wasn't just a layup, right? And that's really where I think, getting out of your comfort zone. If agents say most of my business is referral business, well, that's great. But maybe to grow your business, you want to get into some more competitive situations and kind of test the limit of your skills, right? And the only way that you really learn is you're going to eventually fail. And when you fail, you look at what you could have done better, and that's how you learn and grow. So if you're always winning and you never fail, you're kind of missing a component to growth, right? Because adversity and failure lead you to creativity and growth in this business, and not frustration. I just like your commission is too high, Janet. Relative to what? Like if you said that to me, I'd say, can you mind relative to what? Right, and then you can talk about, hey, if somebody charged you 0.5% and they got 10% less than I did, and I charged you 3, which would be a better deal for you, Janet? I'm just curious, right? How many of you have the confidence to say that and know your numbers well enough where you can document it? And I just think you really need to have those answers. And even if they don't ask it, they can feel it, right? They can feel it in the room that you're confident and that that it's charging 3 or 3.5% for what we do is a tremendous value because you deliver 10%. I'd say, look, Janet, you know what? Yeah, although I get 9% higher than those discount companies, at the end of this experience, I'm sure you're going to say, wow, that was great. You did a great job, and you may even offer me a bonus, but don't worry, I won't take it. Think about that, right? So anyway, that's how I'm going to wrap it up here today, and have a great weekend, and hope you at least learned 1 or 2 things here that you could put into effect. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Rob.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Rob.
You.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.